All right, so let's see if we can close this a little bit like this. So welcome to this Data AI Camp Inspiration session. A quick backdrop to what we're going to talk about today is that me and Mikael has spent a lot of time throughout the years, even since we started Dairdux, on the key focus to understand sort of to build the deeper belief system around adoption and transformation when it comes to data and AI. And let's see. If in a nutshell, for people who doesn't know Dairdux so well, we've been around since 2019, and we started out of experiences in Vattenfall. Both me and Mikael has worked in Vattenfall for many years, and basically the whole challenge of navigating data and AI transformation or learning or adoption at scale. So we work as a consortium. We have friends who are very, very technical. And we do work where we sort of a lot of work with Scania, where some of the technical guys are embedded in the teams to do the engineering stuff. But Dairdux core focus is really on the shaping around learning and development and adoption. And ultimately, we have a quite strong belief system that you need to be much more adoption centered. And with that in mind, we have sort of over the years starting to fine tune sort of our own intellectual property. Like all consultants, we are dreaming of how do we productize our consulting, or how do we understand it in a way so we can clone our ways of thinking and working and do more and more towards train the trainer or embed it within the organizations we work with. With Boliden, as an example, we experimented more properly for the first time with some success, but still can be done better, of what we call shadow program manager or shadow lead roles, where the core idea is that the kind of stuff that we're going to talk about today, you can't really outsource, in our opinion. That's our learning from Vattenfall. You can use consultants, you can work together with friends, you can work, but you need to be very, very embedded in terms of the adoption journey or change journey. And with that in mind, we're gonna explore some key principles around data and AI, L&D and transformation programs. And this, what you're looking at here is sort of the belief system we built up over the years with Vattenfall, Scania, Tetra Pak, engagement with Boliden and stuff like that, and that we are honing in on now. And if you've been to Data Innovation Summit, some of these slides you've seen before, but you always see it sort of from the super high fly keynote approach on the stage. But here now we're trying to really pull it down to a specific angle. Learning and development, enablement. I really like the enablement title that some of you are sort of taking on. And specifically transformation programs. Our point of view is fairly large enterprise, and it's fairly fundamental of how you organize transformation, where we see the view of transformation sometimes sitting inside the chief data officer function, or the data and analytics function of an organization. We see it sometimes, like in Tetra Pak, it's a completely separate unit sitting in sort of to manage the portfolio transformation, and and all of these things we kind of seeing what we think are challenging pitfalls that is sort of we are coming from a way how we have looked at transformation and learning, and we are thinking carefully now, will that work in the age of AI? And so what we're going to do today, we're actually going to explore this we're going to use Dairdux models and belief system to sort of explore this. And basically, the core logic here is basically we kind of need to be careful how we understand and fight AI hype. And a lot of the stuff we see is in our rhetorics anti-clockwise. We kind of start with the tech. We try to learn the tech, and then in the end, we have a hard time getting to value. And sometimes we say we need to start with value, but we still go anti-clockwise. And when it comes to learning and development, and if you have a true adoption focus, we think there are deeper ideas here that needs to be considered. Throughout this webinar now, we will use what is the DIB. Spotify years back had as a framework internally how they were sort of navigating from data insights to beliefs to bets, how the strategic change or the journey of Spotify went. I mean, and the most famous DIB they ever made, I think, was to flipping from the PC as the first PC first or computer first to mobile first. So that whole fundamental shift, it was a fairly substantial thinking, and they've been continuously using this framework, like trying to observe things from their suck out insights, landing a belief system of what they believing, and based on that making bets. And here, maybe that's the sort of the deeper key message here. When it comes to transformation in general, what we have observed, or how we look at learning and development, we don't really see a shared belief system across large organizations on how transformational learning works. So we run so fast, we have so much to do, so we end up, if I'm a little bit rude, running like headless chickens into different things. And we're going to have a look at that and understand what that leads to, and understand how could we practically tackle this in a different way. The core challenge is that what I say now is quite obvious insight that you can get to quite fast, but how to do it practically is another story. So we're going to use this format. We're going to now, I'm going to now go through a flow. I mean, like, so to convey the Dairdux belief system around this, and then use that to explore this topic. It's like a red thread and a flow in this session. So I'm going to be fairly fast. So for the ones in the car, it will be challenging, because it's going to be like, I'm going to have a voiceover to slides that I'm flipping quite fast. And then then the core point now is to get through that in maybe 40 minutes or 30 minutes, I think 45 minutes, and then have a chance to stay on for the Q&A of the time. I really encourage all of you to write, as I'm talking, write your reflections or questions in the chat. If you have questions, or if you even have challenges that, Henrik, you're wrong here, or you haven't thought about this, please write your questions as we go in the chat, and then we can pick them up later. And if we try to do it together continuously, we get the chronological line for questions that follows so if we look from start to bottom, we get a chronological view of the questions in relation to when how the webinar unfolded. So with that, we're going to start now with trying to look at some observations, try to distill some insights that will lead us to some pitfalls and maybe some principles of how we can work differently. And then we'll look at some examples of how those principles would work in reality. The first observation, the AI speed trap. I'm not sure everyone has looked at this. I know, Magnus Gille, this is one of your favorite benchmarks. We are looking at the reality where the AI capabilities are doubling every month. That is a fairly interesting fact from a learning and development and transformation perspective. What is useful to train on? What is useful in the terms of how we design stuff when the fundamental underlying technologies are moving very fast? I mean, like the way it has developed, if you look at the actual meter benchmark, it's somewhere up to 2 hours now with ChatGPT 5. And that in itself also puts some sort of core constraints on how we will train and teach around AI. So when we are up to 2-hour tasks, if you put that in the context of the company, and if you follow this trajectory, we get to quite substantial tasks or quite substantial things that would need governance in our normal work. So we are getting quite fast out of this sort of personal productivity frontier and into things that sort of are enterprise grade, or that sort of this is one angle. The other angle, when you're getting up to these much longer tasks or strings of tasks, the whole contextualization of how you feed data into the AI becomes quite super relevant. The difference between correlation and causation, the difference of how you now need to build scaffolding and different things to actually make sure that the AI stays on point. So some interesting observations in the actual technologies. What can we say about that from a learning and change perspective as a first insight? I mean, somewhere here, our core job is switching into the core learning of adaptability. So an L&D then, how could we enable or should we enable adaptivity? What is that work? This is one key angle. The other key angle will, of course, be how can we, in our L&D and transformation efforts of bigger scale, when we are rolling it out to more or broader in the organization, how can we seek out slow-moving dimensions? So what is actually worth investing training in that is not obsolete in 1 year, that is not obsolete within the cycle? So if you take a hard look at what you're doing and how you're designing things, I think those kind of insights or constraints needs to be with you. So this is kind of first little insight. If I take an example, in its rawest sense, the first, what we saw, like prompt engineering in terms of techniques or frameworks, how it came up. Maybe the way to do that has a very short shelf life, because the way how that is shaped is very much in relation to the GPT at hand, or the sort of the iteration the productivity frontier as is. If you flip the same sort of training, but you move into thinking like a programmer, or you move into, okay, what are the fundamentals that you need to organize? If you build for 2-hour task, you're starting to build a system, really, even if it's a personal system. So a small shift in mindset and a shift in how we design this makes it more sustainable. That's the main point with this example. If I continue on to this story now, we might, the next major thing that we need to kind of think about is like no one has not seen the discussion of agentic workflows and the core idea that we sort of now moving into another space of how to think about systems. All the big system vendors are sort of flipping from the traditional we are a business application to more of co-worker style of understandings of what they are. It doesn't matter if we talk Salesforce or from a business application, they are scrambling to develop in this direction. Or if you go towards more do-it-yourself approaches with the large data stack. So if we're gonna dissect this insight a little bit, I mean, like the angle we are taking when we are looking at this, agentic workflows, we are really talking about AI jargon, and we are talking about cross-functional and autonomous teams. So either teams of a multi-flow of agents that you string together in different ways, or which is the equivalent of doing a human team that is cross-functional. So you get to something where you need more than one brain in order to solve the question. So that sort of takes us into the next observation and how we can think about this. And this is something that also really complicates how we divide and look at data and AI learning. So right now, in an organization, you will have people who have sort of understood AI from 3 different perspectives, a little bit depending on which roles they have. So, and it's super obvious if you read on LinkedIn or follow media, that you can seek out influencers or experts who are really into the whole, how do we prompt, how do we use Lovable, how do we vibe code, or even how do we more efficiently use our GPT-5, how do we string together our own GPTs, etc. And then you have the whole thing that I grew up with, how do we make this scale? How do we make this safe? How do we understand the data? So we have the whole enterprise view, who people are coming from a data background, a data platform background, machine learning background, and I'm trying to then understand that angle, sort of the chief data officer angle of this. And then you have, on the one hand side, the really deep math systems, research engineering, really understand what goes in, how the transformer work, how you need to create scaffolding, how MCP protocol should be done, ultimately things that allows us to do more long tasks. And this has been a real challenge, I think. If you look at the learning and development space in data and AI, it becomes super confusing where to go right now, who to listen to and stuff like that. Our take on this is actually what you're looking at is nothing else but the fundamental cross-functional co-creation team. So you're actually looking at these three Bibles are not three competing streams. They are the sort of three lenses we need to have in order to build safely. And ultimately, it's a little bit like if you go to the business side and the adopter, they dream about staying in their domain, and I don't need to go to IT. I can use the prompt it, and I get a system on its own. And anyone who knows anything that comes from the engineering space knows that won't work, or it might work for prototypes, but it will never work to scale up properly in a large enterprise. So I think the way we understand this observation is that it kind of indicates that personal productivity, or sort of the first generation of Gen AI training or L&D training and training programs that we are now spending quite a lot of money on, is very much about personal productivity. And if you ask Cassie Kosorkov, ex-decision scientist in Google, she calls this the enterprise cop-out. You're literally teaching people how to use a computer and say, off you go. That has very little to do with enablement from an enterprise point of view. And the observation is kind of what is personal productivity and speed in doing a task might not necessarily equate to team effectiveness, operational effectiveness. So we can steal now from sort of team topologies or the software world that we are kind of going to a point where we are DevOpsing things and we need a cross-functional team. So that kind of puts us on a trajectory that how do we design learning? How do we design transformation that emphasizes the cross-functionality and maybe say not trying to get every single user to be sort of a unicorn to know everything, but it's more about how we organize learning and change in relation to different competencies. And maybe then, okay, what is a cross-functional team? We are coming from a space where we might have a team of everybody's a business controller within business control. Everybody's the same, has come from a certain discipline. And I'm talking about now, okay, we need to, if we're going to have AI co-workers in the team, and we need to design that, and we need to maintain that, and we need to master that, we kind of need to have people who both master the data that feeds into the GPT, and we need to master the agent itself. So we get very fast to how to do learning on team level. And it's very, very tricky to go to individual level without being T-shaped. So we are getting to a learning experience or change experience that where the word T-shaped, I think it's worth noting. T-shaped simply means people have a general understanding for all the different facets, how they're working in a team, but they might have their domain expertise. Everybody's bringing their domain expertise, but they need to be able to communicate and work together with the people that are not the same as them. So that kind of learning takes us to the third major sort of observation, and that is the prototype graveyard. And the latest report was like 95% of all AI investments fail. I think here now, the prototype graveyard is the starting point, really, where we started Dairdux. It's like, it's not we need to distinguish between the difference to do invention and how we take invention into normalization. We saw it in the internet era. We saw the technology coming in the 90s. We had the internet bubble, 2000, and then ultimately it was normalized 5, 10, 15 years later. Now, I mean, like, everything we said in 99 happened, and more. It just took us 20 years to reach normalization. And I think that's the whole idea. How do we accelerate normalization? That becomes one of them slow-moving dimensions worth training and worth working with transformation. If we move into this topic now, I mean, like, I'm gonna, if we do the backdrop of some of the slides we used at Data Innovation Summit. So when we're talking about new to normal, I think this is quite misunderstood. We come from a picture of diffusion of innovations. We talk about innovators, early adopters. I mean, like, our way of looking at this from a learning and transformation point of view is that when we're looking at the lingo of diffusion of innovations, we are looking at the invention or the new innovation or the new way of doing things or the new app as something that magically, when it has perfect fit, will simply take on its course and move to sort of cross the chasm and move to normalcy. In reality, if you look at this from a learning point of view and transformation point of view, we are dealing with an adoption cascade, where we are looking at how can we go through a rate of adoption events, and how should we train and learn and work depending on where we are. And we get to a simple equation: invention times adoption equals innovation. So if we move on this rhetoric, we come from what are we doing in terms of helping people find from new doings, new things we can do to work more effectively, into how do we normalize that into practices at scale or within a team. And if we take this sort of story, I mean, like, you get the equation in the bottom, and you get to some sort of a view here that we have invention on the left-hand side, adoption in the middle that leads to innovation. And the core rhetoric is that no transformation without adoption. So how we define and work with adopters and learning with adopters becomes essential. So the learning and development, enablement and transformation perspective is in relation to adoption. Regardless if I talk about user adoption out in the business context, or if I'm talking about engineers adopting new ways to use their data platform or use their coding tools, so to speak. If I go from here, the core topic then, from a learning and development point of view and change management transformation point of view, how do we take adoption from a pattern, or how do we understand this so we can sort of look deeper into how we can accelerate adoption, how we can accelerate taking things into normal, and therefore things we can train that allows us then to work with any technology, but taking it to normalization faster or smoother, safer. If I take this here, I mean, like, if you know your sort of your heroes, your literary heroes in innovation, and you have your Josef Schumpeter, who framed this already very, very early in the 40s, and we think it's Schumpeter's shift we're talking about. So when we are talking about innovation and when we're talking about distilling out what this is all about, he frames it quite eloquently to saying that innovation is about the doing of new things, or the doing of things already being done in new ways. So when we are now enabling people, when we are now training people, we are trying to go from the possible of what are the things that we could do with this technology, and into how do we make this practical? How do we actually make this our current behavior? If we use this backdrop and now explore that from sort of different perspectives of transformation and different perspective of learning, you get to a point where on the one hand side, you have the new doing in the middle. This is the actual core thing. We need to figure out a new way of doing things, a new way of coding, a new way of doing data, a new way of managing data governance, a new way of building workflows with GPTs. And when we have experimented with that, we are always doing this new doing in relation to a job to be done. Are we trying to make a marketing material more effective? Are we trying to streamline and automate our business control closing, etc., etc.? It's in a context to people in the business who wants to increase productivity, to be more effective on a job to be done. And ultimately, when you have experimented and find new ways, the real effort comes to normalizing. When it comes to technology engineer, the CDO office, what we are trying to do is we are trying to understand how can we boost this. So how can we different ways to work with enabling and boosting people in their new doing and normalizing. So in this context now, if you look at the GPT, that's a boost. That's a product to be employed to solve a certain task. So the tricky point now is if you take a step back from this picture and, okay, what should we be training? What should we be educating on? And how should that work when we want to go from skills to practices? We want to normalize ways of working. And how can we avoid the prototype graveyard? We started at the prototype graveyard. So one core question when I look at this picture is I'm start thinking for myself, how do I balance my learning and development and transformation investments between finding new ways to teaching and finding friction in my organization or better ways of do things, regardless of technology. How do I teach people? How do we work with making normalization not such a muddle through and such a strong inertia, but actually much more effective? How can we train in normalization to taking something from one guy to a team, from a team to a business unit, from a business unit, widespread? This is the way we do things. And ultimately then, what about the boosting part? Where does this come in? This is one angle, so where to balance this. Another way, if we look at invention and adoption, I know a lot of people are doing training now, basically quite basic training for normal people to lift the game and be aware and getting AI into the comfort zone. So that is really, to me, when we do like prompt engineering and we learn the very, very basics of AI or experiment a little bit, get to try out ChatGPT. We are doing invention training. We are training on sort of seeing the art of possible, but then to go from, you could do this and this and this, even if it's on a personal level, to train people how to experiment, to actually fundamentally shift behavior as an individual and then as a team and then as a business unit, as is different than what you get from sort of just seeing the tool. So how do you put the tool into large scale use in a team becomes other things. Those are the kind of reflections, the deeper reflections that I think is important. If I continue from this angle and I'm start breaking this down, new doing is investing in efforts to get jobs done. So how do we invest in efforts to find new ways of doing things? It's a skill in itself. This is where we learn approaches to sort of identify friction or problems in our processes. Normalizing, this is about when we have something, what are the things that we need to do to take anything from new to normal in terms of, we have done it now, one pilot has done it in one corner in here. If we want to scale this up, what needs to happen and who needs to be trained or who needs to be part of this? And boosting, how can we employ the products? What are the products to be employed for the new doing? Is it enough with only the GPT or the LLM, or do we need the LLM together with the RAG, together with an MCP scaffolding in a certain way for this to be useful? So basically, boosting, new doing, normalizing. If you look at those three topics, our assumption here is that we can distill out slow-moving dimensions. So things worth training in, things worth talking about, things worth educating, that is not completely tied to the technology at hand right now, but it's tied to, regardless of technology, sorting out the right things. And then the second key learning is that, like, if we look at the effort, how much lies in the technology, how much work lies in sort of figuring out the new way of doing things versus how much work lies in normalizing stuff, there is some kind of old 10-20-70 rule. So I used to say in the past, when we want to have value from AI, 10% lies with choosing the right AI techniques, having the right model, having the right algorithm. 20% is around the right data and infrastructure and the ways, and then normalizing is the 70%. Having the right practices, ways of working at scale. That's sort of that's where a lot of the effort is. And I don't think we are quite there in how we are balancing our learning and development efforts. My take. Now, so what we have looked at now is like an entity map of key things we need to do. We're starting getting some insights maybe of how to think on a strategic level to balance investments in learning and development and change. But how to now put this into practice, right? How do you make faces out of this? How does this look like? And this is the normal journey. I mean, like, you always need to start with a value prop of an idea of making things in a new way. So when we allow teaching people to use new technologies without focusing so much on their job, it's about getting them an art of possible. This is sort of potential that we might be able to do this whole task in a much more efficient way. You start doing you start sort of you excite people with the possibilities of AI and data, but in the end you kind of then look at, okay, where can we use it? What's the use case? From the use case now, how would we fit that into our normal ways of working, and how should the product be designed in such a way so it works fluently? And when it works fluently, what is the work that needs to go into expanding this and normalizing this? And ultimately, I don't want one person to do ad hoc AI, but in the end, this is the new way of doing our fundamental process in business control or in marketing or whatever it is. So this sort of gives a sort of a view of how we can train in all those different fundamentals. And here comes the kicker. In the organizations that I've been working on, and I think several of you represent in this webinar, this journey looks easy on paper, but when you get to the real large enterprise, you get to navigate a lot of different change agents. So you have the people who are adopting new ways of working. That's the users. You have someone who needs to technically make that happen, maybe. You have security laws. You have sort of standards on which GPT to use. So you have a much broader picture in order to go to normalization. And what I'm talking about here is that if we want to go from skills, so if we want to go from sort of I'm teaching someone approaches to be innovative and be adapt and adapt new ways, to go from sort of the basic stuff to see the potential to actually not when you hit the reality, there is a lot of navigation going on. And here now comes another key learning for us that is in learning and development and change. When we do open training, when we do training that sort of we can buy off the shelf in different ways, we kind of end up working on practices or ideas of how we could work differently. But in reality, when you want to take something to normalization, you need to come to a common belief system and a common view of how this is done in a way that navigates all the agents of change. So these are blockers. These are things that you, over a life cycle from new to normal, from idea and invention to large scale rollout, you need to navigate. And typically here, we see that we are giving a lot of training on sort of the new techniques, and people are excited about the new doing, but we end up in the prototype graveyard because we haven't really trained how people more effectively navigate this space. my job when I was at Vattenfall years back was really to get any shit done. I needed to learn how Vattenfall worked in this context. What do I need to do? Who do I need to have? And anyone who works on a leadership level knows that this navigation, that's sort of the hidden agenda of the CDO. That's the hidden agenda that sort of that we're muddling through on this topic. And if we can teach more people, if we can clarify how this works, that becomes essential. And from a learning and development point of view, then, if we want to go from skills to practice, it kind of puts us on a trajectory that we have the work. We need to basically sort these things out, and we need to, in the end, maybe make this into some sort of process. Typically now, when we look at processes and governing of innovation, they are very project-centric, they're very technology-centric, and they're governing our ways of implementing tech. But they are not really governing people's commitment to adopt things. It's a slightly different angle into the same problem. It's looking at the same challenge, new to normal, from a different lens. And by doing that, we can uncover more slow-moving dimensions or things that we need to work on for our enablement initiatives, for our training initiatives, to go from prototypes or one-person approaches to team approaches to unit approaches for things. So we get back to this core topic now. If I'm going to take this home now, like we can sort of, from this angle, we can suck out some key data transformation truths. Invention without adoption is innovation theater. Time to normal measure speed of innovation. Boosting makes new doing effective, right? If we do it right, we can with the right setups and products do this faster. And ultimately now, navigating the internal context from new to normal, that is a substantial piece of work. And how much is this a blind spot in how we're training people or what we need to train people in? We say we have a team who are really keen to get going, but to help them really enable that becomes a key topic. So if I'm now going to summarize this, is sort of observe pitfalls and objectives. We think there is some sort of, on a simple way of looking at this, like how to shape the new normal or how to shape the mission for learning and development and transformation offices or functions. So I mean, like the wanted outcome is quite simple, right? We want to enable organizational adaptivity. I mean, like it's not enough to train in new tech. The new tech is being replaced in a rapid pace. But so we need to continuously adapt. And then we get to some lasting objectives or missions that sort of the learning and transformation need to organize themselves around. So I mean, like, so the fundamental thing is to do things to learn. So we do discovery. We at some part we use new tech. We try new tech. That's the experimentation phase, to experiment that there are new ways to do the same job. And then we need to put that in the context of blind spotting. Where could we put it? The next dimension that becomes super important to teach people is learning to do the new things. And literally here it's about friction reduction, and it's about solving the right problem. Sometimes we might be able to solve something with a GPT on a personal productivity level, but was that the right problem to solve? So the whole competence to understand friction and to uncover the dimensionalities of friction becomes essential for us to solve the right problem. And then basically the next thing is how can we learn how to do those things faster? How can we learn to normalize stuff? How can we put frameworks in place or operating models or governance in place for adopting new things? And how can we teach people how it works in our company on those dimensions? The pitfalls that we sort of seen, and I haven't seen all of them in one company, but things that sort of different things that I think we haven't really thought ourselves through. We are running fast. So the first challenge is that we have a transformation office, so we have a view of transformation who are sort of stuck in the old way of looking at we're going from one steady state to another. I mean, like from the ERP system era, we have one ERP system, and now we need to educate people to use the new ERP system. And now we're going to use that ERP system for the next 10 years. So that's transformation as a word sort of indicates that we are, if we're not careful, that we are thinking of this from one steady state to another. And I think that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing continuous adaptability as the thing we need to teach or frame transformation around. Invention focus. We are educating on the tool and technology and implementing the process. A very technocratic view, or versus what's the workflow, what's the new workflow, what's the practices, what's the ways of working. The tool is a simplistic way of getting out to, I can teach you tools, but I have no clue around how you work or what your job is. So to educate on practices, you need L&D must be much, much closer and much more embedded. So that links to the last topic. Personal productivity instead of team effectiveness. There's a lot of investment in learning and development, and specifically in AI, that goes into sort of the personal productivity space. And how useful is that on an enterprise? I'm not so sure. So I think it's a pitfall to think of we fix you learn AI. You essentially give people a view that they can do this on their own when they can't, not in the near future at least, with multi-agent approaches. That would be too tricky for one person, I think. Maybe in 5 years, when the technology has moved a lot further, but where we are now, it's not stable enough. We have a fundamental arena to whatever we are teaching to our learning and teaching to our users on operational level. What are the things that leadership needs to unlearn? So it's problematic when the fundamental steering way of organizing is stuck in a steady state or a traditional way, versus all the people are now sort of supposed to be adaptive. So we need to then start looking at what we are saying now. How does that shift our budget steering? How does that shift our portfolio steering? How does that shift our way to understand resource allocation, et cetera, et cetera? If I'm saying a cross-functional team needs to be out in the domain, it means tech roles part of of some kind, part of the core business team. And so now we need to think about unlearning what has been really deeply ingrained patterns of how leadership and enterprise steering works in our company. That needs to happen at the same time. So essentially what I'm talking about, what's the unlearning and learning we need to do continuously on middle management and top management to create the arena for all the work to have traction. And then we come to maybe one of the key things here where I think is problematic, that the L&D and transformation, if we come from the legacy enterprise as a support function, Ericsson University or someone who sort of goes out and shops for learning programs at the street, it doesn't work like that. If we look at new to normal, it's an embedded journey. If we look at world-class software development or digital data natives, we are developing things. We are learning on the job. We are learning. We are doing our learning cycles within the sprint. We're doing our retros. What can we do better next time? So learning and development and enablement needs to be much closer embedded. And it sort of shifts the view of what can me, if I'm a learning and development practitioner or expert, maybe I can't do my job on my own anymore. I need to be part of the enablement team. I need to lean in a different way. So here we can observe quite different views of how learning and development is organized and how they look at their mission. And we think it needs to be much more embedded. You're not going to get from skills into workflows if you, as a L&D person, are enabling them to work in the real flows. And if you look at an identity perspective of people in these roles, you get to a point where I'm not here to solve it for you. I'm not a support function. I'm here to give you a toolbox. I'm here to help you maybe very complex things more pedagogical. I'm here to basically look at the engineering stuff and frame it in a way so normal people can use it, etc., etc. So your job is there as part of the team to pick up on how do we improve our own learning, how do we improve our internal learning. And maybe you then you're T-shaped, you understand how it works, but your deep expertise is learning and change. But you need to embed that as part of the new to normal view. So with that, we kind of come to the unlearning problem, and this is a little bit like, we are coming here from a data camp perspective, which is sort of the deeper problem here, if we're trying to put words on it, is that each function to some degree are not really working. We are understanding we have a pocket of understanding from our perspective, and we haven't found the lingo that crosses from the three Bible, from the research to the enterprise grade to the person how we talk about innovation and adoption and learning together. This is one challenge. We see that we are jumping very fast into how we drive transformation. So there's not really an arena to create shared assumptions. So what I've done now with this webinar, I've given you sort of a shared assumptions, what to care about for learning and development. Have we really had that opportunity? I mean, like I see even transformation roles within a CDO office that are sort of new in their role, they get hired in there, and they have not really been able to connect my learning in relation to platform or data governance, etc. This is one angle. I see another angle where we have people in HR needing to go out and create a curricula for learning and development, GPTs. We were part of a very big tender that we lost. That was super clear that the product, a large manufacturing enterprise, the product function went out and shopped for GPT training for product owners. Great, but they had no connection to the actual sort of data science community or data engineering community within the large manufacturing. So it was from central perspective, it was all shadow IT, shadow training. And literally now we have competing messages on what is AI, competing messages on how you should tackle it. So with that in mind, I'm going to leave you here with sort of how to start thinking about that. I mean, so our view of looking at this is very much that when we do training, we think we need to work on the fundamental leadership dimensions on the right hand side, the way we do value engineering and investment engineering, the way we allocate budgets and portfolio is a fundamental understanding that leads to the right way. So to do data and AI platform and still not addressing the team composition and the budgets accordingly, you will end up in an arena where you're trying to put the tech in where the arena is and the organizational mandates doesn't fit. Flow and agents engineering, you need to be very careful to organize the teams and the agencies and it becomes more and more important the more AI agentic workflows we have in order to sort out blast radius. So these are sort of core dimensions that we need to develop and learn around in order to sort of go from new to normal. Those four dimensions are sort of they are either giving compounding effects to each other, networks effects to each other, or they're creating inertia for each other. And if I look at that, sort of what are some sort of main heuristics for learning and development that we can suck out? And I'm not going to go through them in detail, but product thinking, how to take process into product, how to DevOps learning, how to decompose things in chunks in order to have ownership and agency, has a lot to do with product thinking. So it's product thinking over process thinking. Even the old agile manifesto, agile approaches is not project, it's product oriented stuff that has been bastardized into project stuff. Focus on slow moving dimensions, we talked about. Team as the smallest units of learning and change kind of changes the game. Learning and development practices, not tools. So some fundamentals that sort of we can have as our underlying assumptions when we go in and look at the specifics in our own organizations. All right, so with that, I'm ready to stop now, and I thought now I'll be a little bit more informal and do a Q&A, but also share some examples. We are running out of time now, so I'm going to continue, but the main flow of the webinar sort of was to here, and now I'm gonna discuss on how we do this in practice, and I'm gonna help this discussion by having sort of some key examples. So let's see how to do this. I'm gonna stop sharing for a while. Do we have any questions, or do you want me to just continue on sort of in the lecture mode, because we are quite a few people in the call, but I'm quite happy if anyone has any specific questions or reflections to take them now before I move on. Gabriel.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, Gabriel Winberg and Magnus Gille has had a lot of things to say in the chat.
Nice.
Yeah. Rama,
Can you hear me?
Rama has raised his hand.
Yeah, so Gabriel, and we start there. Rami, Gabriel, and Magnus. We start here.
Yeah.
No, but please go ahead.
So, Gabriel, you can start.
Thanks.
What's your questions or reflections?
I have a question about the new to normal metric. I think it's an interesting way of looking at stuff. How would you measure? How would you capture those metrics? How will you find that?
I mean, like if you look at time to normal, so typically we can measure how fast could we build the system. What I think you need to measure is that when is this our new process or ways of working. You can measure that by in a proxy way by looking at when you have changed your governance or when your process has formally been approved. So if I go to an example in business control in Vattenfall, we work with a fundamentally different way of doing end year closing using Power BI to a large degree. So you get to a point where when are we living in the Excel and when did we all do it the old way? And when did the CFO actually steer their meetings in and therefore pushed this, the controller community to actually do the work in Power BI in this case. So you see the difference. You can measure. Yeah. If I look at the rollout perspective, we had a very clear view of we built something. It took us maybe 1 or 2 years, and then we had an onboarding cycle when we went to the different to hold the hands of each business controller community, and then you had a timeline. When are we holding your hand, and when are we seeing you moving in and working here? So it is quite easy to measure as long as you agree on the way to measure it. It's not hard, but you need to define it. You need to define it in the context of the adoption at hand.
Right. Thanks.
And Rama. I think Rama, you had your hand up, and then Magnus. But Ram.
Yes, I have. No, but this was spot on, Henrik. I mean, some of the things, because I have been strongly saying that at the bank as well, that we sometimes have an operating model issue, and I'm not saying that the operating model is wrong, but we need to rethink the operating model, at least here. We sometimes have a process issues. That means we have a velocity problem.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes we have a pattern that we have never seen, an architectural problem. So it's basically sometimes the lens that you use are still the old lens. Right. So you have this problem. So you quickly create some prototype, but you can't put it on production. But because someone in the enterprise architect sees it from a completely different lens or the old lens. Right. But having said that, one of the challenges, and all of these challenges are still more or less, we know that those challenges are present. But the other challenge is that when you have the solution in place, most of the time where it fails is adoption. And most of the time adoption, the failure of adoption is basically attributed to resistance, but it's actually not resistance. It's actually having or a wrong incentive model or no incentive model in place. I'll give an example. The moment if someone adopts a solution and say that, okay, we save 10 million by doing this, then there is a finance organization that says, I'm going to cut 10 million from your budget next year, right? So that's, you penalize even before you adopt this, right? So not having a right incentive model is actually a big problem. So that's one. The other thing which I would want to also understand from others in the call as well is that lot of the, as you mentioned, things are moving very fast here, both from a technology front and also from new implementations and so on. So new companies popping up every now and then. And our current IT processes of onboarding any technology or onboarding any system, it is still geared towards implementing or onboarding large ERP systems. It's like it takes massive 9 months to do this. And by the time you are done with that either that company, and that has happened now quite many times, that company gets acquired by some other company and then your strategy is completely upside down. Or you went all in on RAG and then you realize that, okay, but maybe not necessarily this vector DB we should have bought another one, right? So there are some part of the technology which is still not mature. And then there are some part of the technology which will still be mature. So that means even if there are new things comes in, this is a no regret investment. So how do you also balance between a no regret investment and an investment that you know that it's a chance something new is going to come up and that investment is going to be upside down?
The two questions are really related, and I give you two examples, right? I give you two fundamental examples. So typically in our learning and development and transformation mandate we've had, people have put you in the spot close to the technology. Okay, so your given mandate in learning and development transformation is in relation to implementing the platform, implementing new tech. But in reality, if you look at this picture, you need to flip the learning and change management effort into value engineering. This is really educating and unlearning on portfolio steering. This is educating and learning on governance metrics. So this is changing the incentive system. So here we have the challenge that for us to succeed, we actually need to go into areas that is not obvious. You cannot succeed by only looking at transformation of the project. You need to take an, what is the transformation perspective that you need to educate another group. If you look at the change agent map, you have now bounders, people who are constraining and restricting this. So now we need to educate the people in governance. Now we need to educate the business controller. I'll give you an example from Traton. We realized 5 years ago we need bucket funding. We've been educating the CFO that we need to go from project-centric steering to bucket funding of teams, and we haven't succeeded yet. That's an essential part of learning and development. Okay, so all of a sudden now, we start looking at a much more nuanced view of who are we training. You're not only training the adopters. What are we needing to do in order to change the system, the arena? And it might not be that you can do it alone, but we need to get there in our learning and development effort. So right now, you cannot solve the problem the way you want to do it by simply educating the staff to do it more. You can only make them more delusionized. If you want to change something now, you need to have a part of your training effort geared to what is the relevant unlearning and the relevant learning for stakeholders. Typically now, if you talk a cross-functional dimension, who do I start with? How do I tackle this practically? If you look at technology on the left-hand side and the business adoption on the one hand side, you have a group of people that you can start with that sort of can give you the momentum going. If you make sure that you have as part of your IT training, steer code training. you start understanding who are typically always sitting in steercos. You need to be a competent steerco member in order to run a data and AI project. You have been running ERP projects for 10 years, 15 years. How many AI projects have you run? Have you been in a steerco for an AI project? Let me give you the steerco work education as an example. What I did now, I basically started to look at this in another angle. Example, a Tetra Pak, exactly the same problem. We work with a central AI team, decision scientists. Time to normal, 4 years. Time to build the model, 3 months. If in a global environment, you get to a point where we do something cool, we might get it into the first prototype in the first market. Now we're going to spread it globally in different regions and stuff like that. And this now is only muddled through. The way we looked at that is basically, okay, go in and look at your project management, your governance view of projects. What are you talking about? What questions are you discussing in the steerco? You're discussing technology, project completion, you're discussing quality of the project, but there was not one single question on adoption commitments. So basically, they are set up to fail from the beginning. We have done a prototype and a project, and now we're going to muddle through to get adoption. I can commit adoption, and I can have that as my steerco model, as my main question to ask from the beginning, and I can have clear escalation path in my operating model if I have adoption as my main thought. So I'm flipping it from a technology-oriented implementation model to adoption commitment-centric governance. One example, right? So the operating model.
Stop there. You're ranting.
I'm ranting. Sorry, but it's a very, very good example. It's a very, very good question.
Yeah.
So, but because I think the main point is you need to look at other types of training for other.
You're still talking, Henrik.
Okay, Magnus, I'm passionate. Sorry, guys. Magnus, please hit us.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is great. This is very good discussion. And I mean, I seem the same thing as you, Rama. If you're kind of taking a step back, that from a large enterprise perspective, there are a lot of different kind of potential bottlenecks, procurement being one of them. If it takes like a few months to buy a thing, and we're saying that capabilities are doubling every 4 to 7 months, I mean, it's kind of obvious that the thing that we were procuring is not the thing that we need. And I kind of return a little bit to the comment I had in the chat about platform engineering. That's a thing I have struggled with a little bit as a product owner for AI enablement. Like, what are these capabilities? What do I want to enable? And I mean, just looking back a few months, the things that we're thinking about right now, I mean, the buzzwords like MCP, maybe some type of MCP register, how to make all of that fit together, that simply did not exist a year ago. So it's very challenging to move fast, identify what you need to provide, and operating all of this in a big environment where we have all of the kind of impediments and bottlenecks that we are talking about. So yeah, a lot of things need to shift, I guess, in order to enable larger enterprise to move with the speed of the market and the speed of the technology.
Two remarks, Henrik, if I may.
Yes, please. Mikael.
I mean, we all know that data is the lifeblood of AI, and quite a lot of sort of the fast-moving things in the AI space is tech. But one thing that is slow-moving is getting your data in order. And I mean, if you have good datafication of the semantics you need to use for your AI needs, then it will be much easier to use the current tech for how to string systems together. So it's so that's sort of also a platform thing, because if you need to have platform teams that actually work on datafication.
Yeah. And I really think that this will put laser focus on data enablement. I mean, data enablement has kind of been in the air for several years, but maybe on a low burner. Oh, it will be good at some point. But now, all focus on AI, but people will very soon realize that the magical things that AI could enable, which I believe are quite a lot, they will not simply manifest unless, just as you say, we have well-structured, well-accessible, readable data. So I think we will have doubly the focus on data enablement as well, not only AI enablement.
Exactly.
So the core idea here is to suck out the slow-moving dimensions. This is number one. I think the other angle here, there's only one way of solving this, and this is how we embed enablement, right? So if you look at the DevOps team, they're at the same time they're experimenting and trying out new technology. If I look at Spotify, or a company that is like a digital native, someone is experimenting with a new open source technology or something that could be useful, prototyping or proving it works. Someone is working on putting the next thing in production, and someone is learning what didn't work or what did we need to fix. So I think the key challenge is that I think in the long run, that's to navigate opportunistically what to focus on becomes really hard from the side. So you need to find a way to structure enablement as a force that accelerates and boosts the teams, and so they can have learning and they can be part of like, trying things out. This is one angle. Then we're back to the same problem as we discussed with Ram. You need to think about AI enablement for coders. You actually need to do enablement for procurement. You need to take out the procurement perspective of your learnings. You need to not take engineering training to them, but you need to educate them on the problem and what it happens, and let them co-create with them how their workflow need to change. The same way as we need to co-create which tool to use, it becomes your job to co-create with procurement how we can have a fast track. I really respect the way you do procurement for ERP. I would never change that. That is really good. In Vattenfall, we worked with full track, fast track. In Ericsson, we worked with fast track, full track. So we are working with framing. When do we have things that fits into a full track view, and when do we have things that fits? Typically, big projects, change requests, one way of doing it. But here we can also talk about types of technologies. They need to adjust. They need to be adaptive too. But in order for them to be adaptive, they don't know this shit. It's your job as AI enablement to think about what is my procurement training? What is my procurement enablement? That's the main topic, Rami. You need to, even if you on surface you're only having engineering or sort of quite technical transformation training, but in reality you need to start compartmentalizing different styles of education for steercos, for business control, for procurement. Those are the main bounders. They are the ones constraining it. And if you don't change the arena, you can't have a new to normal faster. Impossible.
No, but I think I completely agree with you. I have one more observation and maybe comment, and would want to get some reflection on that. And this is something that I've been thinking is that, and I saw that in your presentation, Henrik, as well, that I see most of the organization are actually trying to chase the 3 minutes that they can save from everyone, right? Yeah. So I think that is one big problem, because while when it adds up in millions, but you cannot reallocate 3 minutes of someone, or you cannot fire 3 minutes of someone, right? So, but that is a good start, right? So I rather see it more as a culture shift than something. It's basically increasing the maturity of the organization, and you should not see it as anything more that you can do magic with the 3 minutes that you have saved of someone. But having said that, there is another view of it, is that you can attack AI where you're kind of attacking the volume, right, which is saving 3 minutes of everyone or 5 minutes of everyone. The other is picking up one hard problem, right, which is and you don't solve, because that is also another problem nowadays in the enterprise, is that one of the way we evaluate, okay, how good are we in AI, is how many use cases have we done? Have we done 20 use cases? Have we done 50 use cases, right? You don't necessarily have to, maybe there are situations where you might have to go after volume, but there are situations where you just have to go after value. You pick up one hard problem, and those hard problems are not necessarily connected to productivity. Those hard problems are maybe more connected to your products and services, your offerings, right?
Yeah.
And that's basically what steers the top line as well. So has then, because mostly when I hear AI within the enterprise and specifically in the Nordics and so on and so forth, I always see AI referred to in the context of the volume cases, the productivity, efficiency, and so on and so forth. I've hardly seen anyone saying that, okay, this is a game changer thing that we have done in our products and offering.
What you're saying here has merit, because I mean, like there's been different case studies, right, from McKinsey and everyone, and some of the learnings of what are the people doing who are succeeding. Typically, two things. First of all, they agree upon a mega hairy problem space. This is the thing. In Traton, we talked about when someone said a use case. No, that's a use case theme. Profitability is not a one use case. It's a use case theme. So we pick a hairy problem as a use case theme, and then you start looking at unpacking that into the different frictions and problems within that, and you get a plethora of 3-minute projects that strings together in a network effect. So I think the point is to center the attention so you can have that conversation on the stakeholder level, get procurement involved, that this is important for the company. Traton and Scania has had order to delivery, with as an example of super important stuff for COVID and stuff like that. And all of a sudden it works easier. So I think that is very useful. Another key topic here becomes also, no, I'll leave it there. I wanted to give you an example. You're referring to the 3-minute training, we learn how to prompt personal productivity. I think the challenge is when we sell that as the end game.
Exactly.
If we sell it as a starting point, it's fine. Let me give you a very concrete example. Many years ago, we really scaled up BI self-service in our periodical closing. Okay, and what we did was we gave all the business controllers a tool to better understand the underlying data that then went into the reporting. So not the accounting, but actually the underlying results. How do we do it? What did we learn? In the beginning, we didn't do any training up front. And what the requirements we got was more or less from the business controllers. I want something that looked like a BF report, static report, PDF file. That was their vision of the improved process. So now all of a sudden we started by doing tool training in Power BI even before we captured the requirements. So we did training, we did the increase of productivity is great. The 3-minute things is great. It's quick wins, but it's also about expanding the comfort zone in new doing. Now you have the understanding for the art of possible. Now the real journey starts to really look at this from a transformative, from a team perspective. If you now found this, you have all learned this, you now need to go to the business controller team. What is the fundamental blockers and productivity? What is our hairy problem? And now we need to start unpicking that. And what I see is that people are confusing the initial training to understand the art of possible with practice training or real change. It's not the same.
Exactly.
So you need to and you need to be careful not to oversell the first step, because if you oversell the first step, what do you mean? You have already fixed it. AI is all about personal productivity. No. So this is it's easy to oversell here. If you look at what they promise in all the prompt classes, all the stuff that you can buy, there's a plethora of what you can buy. They are promising transformation from their class, but they're only giving ideation. Increased productivity of the person is about ideation space. That's all. It doesn't go beyond ideation. So I think we need invention training. We need to understand the art of possible, but that's only to calibrate what we could be doing. It has nothing to do with real change, in my opinion.
Exactly.
And also the real blocker to significant productivity gains is how we design the workflows. I mean, traditional functional, the functional divisional label that we sort of is traditional in modern companies. That's the main blocker.
No, and that I completely agree with you.
And then you have the 3-minute space time saving. That's just a band-aid. It won't help you in the long run.
So once again, what Mikael is saying now, that's a slow moving dimension. If, as part of our AI efforts, we invest more time in how do you spot friction? How do you spot information feedback flows? How do you understand that you don't have the right data from the right angles to make this decision? Now we can start automating the right and the right feedback flows. We can build an AI agent who is not hallucinating, but is actually working with the right context. So when we are talking about AI and AI agent, contextualization becomes key. Contextualization is all about organizing from friction to flow. This is a slow-moving dimension we can teach to better understand what are the input data or feedback flows we need to set up for this to flow more effectively. Then we can take that into more precise system development, what we need to build. You see what I mean? So you flipped it from a technology training into fundamentals training in order to define the right problem to solve.
Exactly.
We actually have a very good concrete example of this. Henrik, you think we are allowed to talk about bodybuilder work at Scania?
I think you can take that example. I don't think it's nothing spectacularly. It's just an example. It's an example of friction in the order to delivery flow. Delivery flow.
Yeah. So Scania, if we look at sort of their Scandinavian truck manufacturing and order to delivery process, once the chassis is built, they have to be shipped to external bodybuilder to build the body of the truck.
And fire engine dumps the truck. It also or maybe use a custom paint shop for a certain for DHL.
Yeah. So and one of the key metrics for Scania is of course delivery precision.
Lead times, bounded capital, trucks waiting in the bottleneck.
Time in yard.
Time in yard.
And this becomes a coordination issue because there's a limited amount of bodybuilders in Scandinavia. There's a limited amount of shippers. So the different market unit has to compete for slots.
There's an optimization problem.
And the thing is, and also they don't datafy the interaction with the bodybuilders, which means that there's no fucking data to base decisions on. They don't even have sort of a dashboard of available bodybuilders and the time slots. They have to actually manually call them and arrange things. I mean, and that's just because that's how it's traditionally done.
Yeah. So to pick apart the friction to flow problem, to solve the right problem, then you start understanding, okay, we need to codify, we can't have this in emails and phone, we need to build an app for them to get the data in, we need to build an optimization algorithm, which slot should we give to which market, etc., etc. When you start picking it apart, it's not a huge problem, technically. No. But you need to start in the friction to flow problem, and you then need to educate people on how to do that. And that is more long-term useful than to, prompt engineering techniques, so to speak. Okay. So the main motto here is that on the one hand side, if I'm going to start summarizing a little bit here, we need to look way broader. Our transformation and scope might on paper look like, are you educating users or you're educating engineers? to use the new platform. But in reality, you have change agents that need to be that is part of the game that you need to take into account, and you need to step one take this problem from a blind spot to, should I educate on this? How do we do the education on procurement? So all of a sudden now in the CDO role and transformation function, or even L&D, you need to start looking at the fundamental world map and then start to balance, okay, how much of my money should I do on user training? How much of my money should I do on steer code training? How much of my money do I need to do on business control or portfolio modeling training? I don't know.
Exactly.
And it's that simple, right? That we are spending all our money on one thing, on the technology, on the invention, on the one user group, and it doesn't take us further. We are not changing the fundamental game.
No, I agree. Yeah. No, but good.
All right.
Thanks for the excellent conversation, a very good session, Henrik. I think it kind of validated.
Our pleasure.
Sorry?
Our pleasure.
Our pleasure.
Yes, thank you. And it of course it validated some of the thoughts that I had as well point of view. And of course, one key takeaway which I think I never thought about, but I always complained about, is that we need to also train the people who control this entire thing, who are basically So I think that is important. And of course, you can't train them the same way you train the engineers. You rather train them that how they should look at this and make decisions.
Yeah. I will leave you with one. I will leave you with one slide. So this webinar is in the context of how do we design offerings around. I will share one thing when I leave now, just to give you food for thought. So we've been thinking really, really hard about this training problem, and in the end, you end up with sort of how do I design training that is cross-disciplinary? How do I design training for different for different stakeholders? So we find a simple way to sort of start looking at, if we were doing a data camp, or if we want to have an offering where we help large organizations design a camp situation, the camp idea is very simple. Since we are shifting people's world views and world model, what they have done for 30 years, it's very hard in a training 15 minutes or 1 hour webinar on Teams. It's kind of offsite. You need time for reflection. So a camp idea of how you take people into this is critical. It's a quite large picture of unlearning. If you think about the learning experience, it needs to be T-shaped. They need to stay within their domain if they're a business controller, but at the same time, they need to know enough to be understanding how their role has changed in relation to the other ones. It needs to be an immersive agenda for impact. You need to have inspiration and give ideas, but you need to be time for discussion. Mix of structured content. It's not only lecturing like I'm doing now. It's lecturing, discussions, go out and talk go out in the woods and talk, the deep talk, to actually get under the hood skin of people. It needs to be peer-led. It needs to be cohort-based. Cohort, business control cohort, steer code cohort, project manager cohort, so they can learn from each other. So if you look at that, this is one angle. If you look at an agenda, how to design this, imagine even that you have trainings where you dare to put fundamental different groups of people in the same room, but they learn maybe and have a common understanding of the problems. You talk about the technology into the challenge end to end. And then you do breakout sessions where you have the business control and procurement people in one end, or the steer codes in one room, and you have the engineers in another one. Then you come back in the day. So you're shaping the common belief system. We did this with Ericsson, where we many years back, has nothing to do with data and AI. We did a transformative shift from project-centric view of R&D into new products, into a PLCM-centric view. And it really you need to go through all the different disciplines of R&D, supply chain, manufacturing, pricing, marketing, whatever it takes to do a product launch. And they needed to understand how will they fit into this new world. So this it is possible to design, but it's another design idea that you start from. And if you have understood the problem, you invest differently. That's the point. I want to stop there.
Yep. But yes, but this was helpful. But I might get in touch with you, but I will also reflect on this a bit
Yes.
more.
Please.
Because we in the bank, we are pretty much undergoing a massive transformation, both on the data side as well as now embarked on the AI side as well. Yeah, some right, some wrongs, but but we are trying to do our best. But yes, and now I have to join my other meeting in 2 minutes.
Please.
Yes.
I'm stealing time. This was the Q&A that we held long. And everybody who's been hanging around, so nice. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. And I hope you got a lot out of it, even if you didn't participate in the discussion. Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.